How's it going, New World? Sethphir here, and today we are back. I know it's been a little while, but we are finally going to be finishing off the Mutation Build Guide series. Today we're going to be talking about melee DPS. I know this is a highly requested one. A lot of people have been looking for this, so it's finally good to dive in for my melee friends here. So let's go ahead and break this video down into a few sections. First, we will talk about attributes, and then we will talk about your consumable set, and finally, we will top it all off with the armor and skill perks in the later end towards the video. So let's go ahead and dive into attributes at the start here. So if we open it up, our main two goals is to get 300 into strength and 200 into constitution. And as you can see, I only have 160, but the rest of that is going to come from my consumables or my food, which is going to give me 40 con, which will push me into the threshold to get this increased armor. It is very useful in the high level mutations because things hit very hard. You're going to be taking a mixture of elemental and physical damage, and having a high health pool will allow you to survive a lot of the mechanics. 300 strength is very, very important because it allows all of your moves to gain grit on your attacks, which are going to be critical for your build, as well as just your damage output. Not being able to be interrupted will go a very long way in terms of melee DPS. There are also some other goodies along the way, such as stamina regen, more damage on stunned and slowed targets, and just damage in general with certain types of attacks, as well as strength just generally boosting your damage. So this is definitely the way to go. So a 300-200 split is recommended. If you are a more experienced and seasoned veteran, you can probably lower the constitution a little bit more and maybe even increase the strength. If you're feeling super spicy, you could get the 5% crit and dex. I don't know if that's worth, but just generally increasing that strength will allow you to do more DPS if you're going for like speedrun type things. But I think for the most part, in terms of clearing all the content, getting it done efficiently and fast, 300 strength, 200 con is for sure the way to go. Next, we will go ahead and dive into the consumables. So this is going to be what you're going to bring to every run, no matter what. So when we talk about consumables, first we'll talk about trophies. You're going to want to have trophies in your house for Corrupted, for Ancients, and for Angry Earth. These are the 3 damage types for mutated dungeons, and you're going to have all 3 of those up. So if you can get the 3%, that's good. If you can get the 4%, which is the basic trophy, that's fantastic. And if somehow you're super rich and you can get the major trophies at 5% each, then that's even better, but that's definitely very, very expensive. So I don't expect everyone to have that. Again, it's not that big of a damage difference. It's only like 3% or something, but it does add up in the end. So those are going to be things you're going to be wanting to look out for. Of course, we are going to bring health potions and regen potions. These are going to be very used very often, right? You're going to need to use these to keep your healer not having to panic all the time, as well as keeping yourself in a healthy range. So you're going to be chugging a lot of these potions. Make sure to bring a lot. And I would definitely have the powerful oak flesh balm, as well as the powerful gemstone dust, ready and able to be used, especially on big pools in the high level mutations, especially this gemstone dust, because it's going to save you a lot of times. The amount of damage that mutated monsters do generally is more weighed towards the elemental side, and it depends on whatever week it is. So if it's fire week, they're probably going to be doing a lot of fire damage because most of their damage is being converted over to fire. So this gemstone dust will really help you out. But do keep in mind that there's a 50% cap on most absorption and resistances, so once you pass that threshold, everything's going to kind of be useless. So you may not need this full 35, and you might be able to get away with a lower quality gemstone dust. So that's just something to keep a little note on there. So next we're going to be talking about weapon coatings. You're going to need a weapon coating of the type appropriate for the dungeon. So if you're doing Lazarus, you need Ancients. Weapon coating, if you're doing Dynasty, you need Corrupted. If you're doing Garden, you need Angry Earth. And that's going to be on each of your weapons. That's going to give you a 15% damage bonus increase. And then you also need a powerful Honing Stone, which is going to be a buff applied to your actual character, which will be a 7% damage increase. So this is going to power you up quite a lot. And finally, you can bring some corruption and blight tinctures. They are not super necessary, but they are very useful in some situations, mainly on Dynasty and on Genesis. You can sort of ignore some mechanics and be a little bit more greedy if you use these potions, so they are nice to have. And then finally, we'll top that all off with the roasted rabbit food, which is going to be the 40 constitution food, which will push us into that 200 threshold. You can use the other foods if you don't have the 40 con food or it's too expensive on your server for whatever reason, as long as the stats add up to 40. So if you want to use that mixture of strength and con, whatever that may be, you can go ahead and do so. So that's going to be it for consumables. That's going to be the basics there. Next, we're going to go ahead and dive into the skill builds. So we're going to be looking at the Great Axe and the Warhammer for a melee DPS. These are the two prime melee DPS weapons. You can use the Rapier as a melee DPS weapon and even the Hatchet, but I probably wouldn't recommend the Hatchet on anything other than a straight single target encounter, and even then it's still very debatable between the Hammer and Great Axe. The amount of investment you would put into it is probably not worth it, especially the type of armor difference you would have to have. So we'll save that for like another theory crafting time. And the Rapier is actually very strong DPS. It's just very not great on any instance besides Dynasty Shipyard, because in Dynasty, mobs will take increased damage from thrust since they are corrupted, but in the Garden of Genesis, they're going to take reduced damage, as well as in the Lazarus Instrumentality, so it's not a very well-rounded weapon. It's kind of a situational one-target thing, but the Great Axe and the Warhammer will get you very solid across the board. These weapons are pretty good anywhere. You can switch them out pretty interchangeable, and they have a lot of crowd control, which is another thing. As a melee DPS, yes, you are there to do the damage, but you are also the prime grouper. You're going to be grouping the mobs together, pulling the mobs in, and getting them clumped up nice and easy for your team to just AoE down, as well as providing a lot of AoE CC yourself. So the first thing we're going to dive into is the Great Axe. We're going to take a look here, and I know you're probably familiar with this tree. All these passives are just going to be the damage increasing passives, and I think they actually changed this one talent a little bit. This is the PTR version, the frustration. They moved it down, so finally we don't have to take this to get some of the other things, so that's very nice. But you will get the full Reap skill and all of the talents, which is going to increase the damage and give you life leech to it. But the most important part of this skill is that you're going to be able to pull in range mobs into the clump of enemies, which is going to speed up your runs a lot, especially if it's in a well-coordinated group. And then we're also going to just take general lifesteal talents and damage increases, and then finally end it with Bloodlust, which is going to give us a big damage boost and movement speed boost. On the right side tree for the Mauler, we're going to take Maelstrom and all of its components, because it is going to allow us to gain a lot of damage, as well as pulling every single monster together, making it super easy for your team to AoE them down. This is going to save you a lot of time on your runs. We are going to take Gravity as well, so when we do pull anything in, it is going to be rooted, which is going to stop archers and annoying ranged enemies from running away. And then finally, we will take Gravwell, as well as its damage increase component for big DPS when we do finally get those mobs clumped up in a cluster. And then Center of Attention to top it all off is just a general damage boost when you're surrounded by a lot of enemies. It will get some value, maybe not all the time, but it's something, and it's pretty much the best thing we can take at this point. So that's going to be it for the Great Axe skills. Next, we're going to be jumping into the Warhammer. The Warhammer has a lot of damage, and we're going to go a bit of a different build than what the normal tanks do. There are two builds for this. You can use the build where you play with Shockwave and the armor reduction thing on it, but I think that's better for the tanks to have, as it kind of has that taunt element for them, and not everyone needs to have Shockwave. Your job is a damage dealer, and you're here to do the DPS, right? So we'll take a look at the left side tree. We're going to take Armor Breaker and its third talent, Lasting Trauma, which is going to give you a 20% armor rend on the target for 10 seconds. This is going to increase everyone's DPS, and it's really good for you. Next, we're going to have Mighty Gavel, which is a very hard-hitting move, and if you go down to the final talent, Justice for All, it's going to get a second follow-up move, which is going to hit incredibly hard for 220%, one of the highest scaling weapon damage moves in the game for like a single and a double hit, and you're going to get a couple other goodies like increased damage done to low-health targets, which is just going to be a very powerful move in general. And then finally, we have Wrecking Ball, which is going to be a great crowd control move, as well as doing a lot of damage, but mainly it's going to give you you fortify, allowing you to exist in the melee fray. So getting 20% fortify for 7 seconds is actually very powerful, and it's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of gemming for max resistance cap, as well as some of these other components. In the passive side here, let's take a look at those. We're going to get an increase on armor penetration for all light and heavy attacks, as well as the hammer time mechanic that you're going to have to play around whenever you do a heavy attack, whether it's fully charged or not. You're going to get a 20% damage bonus for 4 seconds, so that's going to be very important. A bit of damage reduction when doing heavy attacks, as well as cooldown on them. And then finally, power through pain, which will give you 35% extra damage after taking damage, which in mutations is pretty much all the time, right? So this is a fantastic talent to have. And then we're going to pick up a few noteworthy passives on the left side tree. This one's just going to get us to the next threshold, but it does give you a bit of damage absorption if there's a lot of monsters around, so it's not too shabby. And then we are going to get this acceleration, which is going to be cooldown reduction with light attacks when something has a debuff on it. That's going to proc majority of the time. And finally, concussive impact, which is going to give us 15% increased damage to anybody who's affected by the Warhammer debuff, which is going to be the armor breaker that you have before. So again, all about doing DPS. Nothing too surprising here, but this is going to allow you to build the most optimal damage route for the Great Axe in Warhammer. So now that we have went over the skills in general, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the gems. And gems is something that we'll talk about before we get into everything else here. And as you can see, in the gems in your weapon will vary depending on the week. So if you are in Dynasty Shipyard, you're going to want Arcane because the corrupted monsters are weak against Arcane. If you are in the Garden of Genesis, you're going to want Ruby. That's going to be fire damage for the Angry Earth. And then if you're in the Ancients territory, the Lazarus Instrumentality, you are going to want Void damage. So that's going to be switched up dependent on the week. So it's either going to be a Sapphire, the Amethyst, or the Ruby. So you're going to have to decide on which one of those you want to do. It's going to convert your damage type over to the Elemental, which is going to do a lot of DPS increase for your weapons. So you're going to want to have both of those there. And then in your armor, you're going to, once again, gear for whatever is the element of the week. So if it is Hellfire mutation, you're going to want fire absorption. If it is the Void or Eternal series, you're going to want void absorption, and so on and so forth. So just make sure you're gearing for that appropriately. And if you see down at the bottom, we can see our total resistance. So with 5 gems, you get about 20% resistance, except for the Void gem. It seems to get more for some reason. It gets you to about 30%. So you would then calculate that in with the fortify bonuses that you are getting from other sources, whether that be gems or a skill that you have, like for example our Wrecking Ball fortified 20% armor bonus. That would get us up to 40% combined with this fire, so we know that we're missing another 10%. So if we can get that somehow, whether that be from our healer buff or from a powerful gemstone dust, whatever that may be, we will be able to cap out on that resistance and be taking a lot less damage from these mutated monsters in their specific given element. Most of the time for jewelry is going to be crafted with a diamond. That seems to be what's very heavy on the market, and most jewelry is made through crafting. So I think the best way to do would be the malachite, because it does offer elemental resistance, which majority of the mutated mobs get their damage converted from whatever their original damage is into an elemental type. So that might give you a bit more value, but diamond is also still good. It'll provide you with physical damage resistance, which some of the mobs still do. So having an oak flesh balm elixir is very good, especially if you're getting hit by archers. They can be very obnoxious and hit really hard. So that would be one thing to watch out for. So just make sure to have a nice bit of consumable repertoire there so that you can choose for the situation and always be prepared and steady for that. All right, so now that we have talked about that, we're going to talk about skill perks. This is going to be a perk section, and we're going to talk about every single thing. So first, we're going to talk about the skill perks themselves. So if we talk about that, we're going to be looking at the talents that we chose in the Great Axe tree. The Reap perk is not very good. It's just going to provide a slow at targets below a 50% threshold, so we're not going to take that one. But the most important one is going to be the Gravity Well perk. It is called Insatiable Grav Well, which allows you to trigger a second Gravity Well explosion that does damage when you hit something that's close to you, as long as you connect with that. So having 2 Grav Wells for the price of 1 is going to be fantastic. That's going to be a mandatory perk to have. and that's going to be our only real mandatory perk. The nice to have perk that we're going to be looking for would be the Maelstrom perk. Whenever you pull or hit somebody with the Maelstrom, it is going to enfeeble them for like a 14% damage reduction. So having the enfeebling Maelstrom perk on your armor can be very good. So we can definitely keep an eye out for that. And then we'll look at our hammer skills. Since we're not really using Shockwave, there's no real mandatory perks in the hammer department for weapon skills, at least. But the nice to have perks would be the Refreshing Mighty Gavel on a melee mob or on a monster kill. That can be good. You can kind of snowball in the dungeons. There is a lot of trash monsters, as I like to say, so you will be able to power your weapon and refresh your cooldown quite often. And the Wrecking Ball perk will add a bit of damage or armor penetration to the attack, so it will hit a little bit harder. It's not significantly big, but it is something, so it could be a decent to have perk. But again, none of these are mandatory because it is very hard to pick and choose like a perfect stat line on your armor in this game. It's just the way it is. So, all right, now we're going to hop into the next section where we're going to talk about the actual perks on the weapons themselves. So we're going to talk about the Great Axe here, and in my opinion, the best perks on the Great Axe is going to be Keen, which is going to give you crit chance, Keenly Empowered, which will give you damage boost when you crit, and Trenchant Strikes, which is a ability that is going to proc and give you extra damage when you have Grit active on yourself, which is going to be for pretty much all melee moves, as well as, since we have 300 strength, we will be getting Grit on all of our light and heavy attacks, so this should have relatively 100% uptime. The hammer is going to follow the exact same pattern. It is going to be Keenly Empowered, and Trenchant Strikes. If you cannot get Trenchant Strikes, having something like Vicious is just as good, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. Rogue is also a strong one. And then, of course, if you can get something like a specific element, like Ancient Bane or Angry Earthbane, that will be very good in that particular dungeon, but it's going to be really hard to find 3 weapons, like a weapon with crit and Angry Earthbane and also Trenchant Strikes, and then find another weapon with crit, Trenchant Strikes, and Ancient Bane. That might be a bit much, so I would generally focus on one particular weapon with good, well-rounded stats that suits all of the situation, than trying to power up a bunch of different weapons just for like a small min-max. It's probably not going to be the best idea. But, you know, of course, if you're like a super speed runner at the end game and you got all your stuff at 625 and you're working on other stuff, maybe you can focus on that type of thing then. So that's going to be it for the weapon perks. Now we're going to talk about the armor perks. The most important thing on the armor piece is going to be your skill perk. So we talked about that Insatiable Gravwell. So as long as you have that, that's going to be fantastic. If you want any of those extra bonus skill perks, you can go for it. But I would prioritize Refreshing Move before those. Refreshing Move is available on every armor and jewelry piece, and it does stack. So if you have 8 of those bonuses on, every time you dodge, you will be getting 8% of your cooldowns back. It is actually insane. When I say it doubles your DPS, it doubles your DPS. It straight up allows you to cast your moves twice, maybe 3 times as fast, so you're going to be putting out a lot more pressure, you're going to be grouping mobs more, you're going to be doing a ton more damage with Refreshing Moves, so that's going to be your number one priority. Make sure you get, sorry, not Refreshing Move, Refreshing Evasion. Refreshing Evasion, whenever you dodge, this is going to be very key for your abilities here. So, now that we have that covered for the armor perks, there are some other ones like Vigor and Invigorated, as you can see here. It's going to lower the time on Weaken and Disease and Rend. Some of the monsters in the Mutated dungeons do apply these afflictions to you, as well as Vigor, which will lower Burn and Disease and Poison. That will also help, so if you can find something with that on there, that is good, because remember, you have 3 perks total, and you need Refreshing Evasion on every single perk, but you don't necessarily need anything else aside from that Insatiable Gravwell. So if you can look for things like Invigorated or Vigor, that can definitely help you out with a small boost of bonus, as well as some of the wards for the particular type of monster. But then again, you're talking about suiting for one dungeon, and it's probably better just to go a broad general DPS increase, especially if you only have one set of 625 gear. So that's going to be your go-tos for that. Next, we'll talk about the amulet. The amulet, there are going to be a few things, but mostly you need to have health, which is going to give you a flat HP increase, divine, which is going to increase the incoming healing onto you, and finally for the amulet we would want refreshing evasion. That's that big important one that we talked about before that's going to give us cooldown reduction when we dodge, and if we have that on 8 pieces we are going to see a significant DPS boost, so that's going to be something to keep in mind. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be the ring. The ring is going to be very important. It's going to be our second source of crit other than the weapon. So we're going to want keen awareness, which is going to give us critical hit chance on the ring. Leeching, which is going to give us a 5% HP gain on all damage that we deal, which will keep us sustained and alive. And finally, refreshing evasion, which once again will give us bigger cooldowns and bigger damage. Now we're going to move on to the earring, which is going to be a nice defensive piece here. We're going to be looking at the perks of regenerating, which is going to be a constant HP percent gain per second. This is a very powerful item over the course of a mutated dungeon. It's going to provide a lot of extra healing that your healer does not have to do, as well as keep you topped up so that you do not die. So it's very important. The next thing will be refreshing toast, which is a 25% cooldown reduction to all potions that you have, which is going to allow you to HP pot faster, to regen pot faster, to oak flesh and gemstone dust faster. So these are all going to be great things. You definitely want to have this. And then finally, we're going to top that off with refreshing evasion, which will be that little 8th and final piece that'll give us that cooldown reduction. So that's going to be very critical to have there. So lastly, we will go over a bit of play style sort of showcase here, and generally what you're looking to do as a melee DPS. So you're usually going to start off with the axe because that's going to be your tool to group things up. I would generally start off with a gravel and pull the monsters in. Once you get in, pull them all in with maelstrom, and especially if you have a target like an archer that would be over here shooting your team and he's not exactly in the melee pile, I would try to reap and pull that monster in because that will pull it into the pile. So what our group usually does is when we run and approach a pool, we will run to the first range monster. If there is a second range monster, one of our melee DPS will use reap and pull that monster into the pile, and then we will proceed to AoE with maelstrom and gravel on top of that. So most of that is just looking for that ranged monster, pulling him in with reap, and if there is no ranged monster, well, hey, just dump all your great axe skills and do a ton of damage right into the stack on the pile there. The next thing we have is going to be the Warhammer, but actually, finally, before we switch to that, let's just go ahead and talk about a general like auto attack thing before we go over. But it's generally a 1-2 hit and then a dodge most of the time. And since you're medium armor, you should have a lot of stamina, especially if you have a Void Blade user in your group that's going to be giving you Oblivion, so your stamina is going to be almost infinite. So you're just always a 1-2 hit combo and then dodge, especially trying to time that dodge around certain mechanics that may or may not be exploding around you is going to be good to do. And don't be afraid to double dodge because that will a lot of times get you away from the exploding monsters and make you just have a very nice safe window. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and move to the gameplay for the Warhammer. The Warhammer is a little bit different because we have to play it around the hammer time mechanic. So whenever we do a heavy attack, we're going to get a 4-second buff for 20% damage on ourselves. So we're going to start off using a heavy attack. You don't have to fully charge it. You can just do a slight charge, like as you see here. So you can just hold it down for a second and get that heavy attack animation. As long as it's an overhead swing, that is the heavy attack instead of the general light attack swing there. So once you get your 20% going, then you will start with Armor Breaker to lower the target's armor, follow it up with a Flatten or the Wrecking Ball, which will knock them on the ground, and then finally do your big DPS move, which will be your Mighty Gavel with the Justice for All second attack by left-clicking, which will add a ton of damage onto the target. So that's going to be your general play style. Most of your damage actually comes from your Warhammer, so you're going to get your cooldowns up a lot faster, but when you see your Great Axe cooldowns are finally back up, I would definitely switch to those and use all of them, and then finally switch back to your Warhammer for most of your DPS. That playstyle will change depending on the dungeon you're in, because in Garden of Genesis you will do more damage with slashing, so it will actually be better for you to auto attack mostly with the Great Axe, and I believe striking takes reduced damage. In Lazarus Instrumentality you will use the Warhammer more because striking gets bonus damage, and then I think they're both relatively about the same on Corrupted corrupted, although the hammer may be a little bit lower DPS on the corrupted version, so that might be a good time to switch up to that shockwave style build that we talked about briefly. It's also in the tank guide video if you want to take a look at that. That should be able to help you out. Alright, that's pretty much going to be it. It's pretty straightforward for melee DPS. Just dodge all of the mechanics for the mutated dungeon, do a lot of damage, bring big crowd control, and group all of the monsters up together in a nice tiny pile so that your team can nuke them down, and you will definitely see a lot of success in these runs. That's going to be it for this video, everyone. Thanks for your time and watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell button down below if you have not already. There is a join button if you're interested in becoming a member today, as well as a Discord and other social medias like Twitter in the description link down below. We will also be checking out some other games here in the future. We've been playing a good bit of Lost Ark, and I believe Elden Ring drops today, so that's going to be exciting to go ahead and dive into. So we will be doing a lot of videos like that, so make sure to check out the ones you like. We'll have some reviews and whatnot coming forward, and of course a lot more guides for New World. Next up in the series will be the ranged DPS guide, so we're going to go into bow and spear and all that good stuff, the dex users, and then finally we'll get a mage guide to wrap it all up, and then we'll take a look at some of the nice and exciting things that New World has coming in the future. I know the devs have talked about some serious content updates, and as well as the blunderbuss possibly coming in March, so that's something to look forward to. So I'm excited to see how the game develops. I will be checking out some other games during the meantime while they're doing that development process, but it should be fun nonetheless. Alright, thanks once again for watching the video, and we will catch you in the next one.